You will not believe this. I was 3 tables deep, balancing iced teas and forced smiles, when I noticed them. A blind date. The kind that tries to look casual, but feels like a job interview with candles. He sat with his shoulders slightly forward, like he was bracing for impact. Mid-30s, kind eyes, worn jacket. Not desperate, just careful. The woman across from him kept checking her phone like it could rescue her. At first, I assumed it was the usual. Awkward small talk, polite laughter, 2 strangers deciding if each other was worth the risk. Then I heard her say it, sharp and light at the same time. Like a joke that wasn't a joke. So you're a single dad? His face didn't change much. He only nodded once. Yeah, it's just me and him. Her smile thinned. I don't do that. I watched him inhale slowly, like he'd trained his body not to react. Like he'd been rejected before and learned how to keep it quiet. She stood up. No argument. No drama. Just a clean exit. But when she moved, something slipped from the edge of his jacket and fluttered to the floor. An 8-year-old's drawing. Crayon lines. A small stick figure family. 2 people holding hands. One labeled Dad in shaky letters. He didn't rush to pick it up. He just stared at it like it hurt to see. I should have stayed out of it. I'm a waitress, not a therapist. But then he looked up at me and asked softly, "Can I get a pen?" And before I knew what I was doing, I said the first thing that came to my mouth. No, I rejected him too. Not because he was broke. Not because he was a single dad. Because I recognized that drawing and the boy behind it. And I knew this man had walked into the one kind of test that can break a child for years. Friday nights at Marrow and Vine always smelled like perfume, pepper, and money pretending it wasn't money. The dining room was warm lit and polished, soft jazz, candle flicker. The kind of place where people lower their voices even when they didn't need to. The kind of place where a blind date could pass as something faded if you tilted your head and believed hard enough. I didn't. I'd been on my feet since 4. My apron already marked with a thin trail of espresso and lemon. My smile was on autopilot. My body knew the map of the room better than my mind did. Table 6 wanted another round. Table 10 was ready for dessert. Table 14 had been trying to flag me down with the urgency of a minor emergency. And then there was Table 9. 2 people. A small table near the window. Not the best seat, not the worst, just public enough to feel safe, private enough to lie. I noticed them because of the way they didn't touch anything at the same time. They were both still, but not comfortable. Like 2 actors who'd studied the same script separately. The woman sat with perfect posture, phone face down but close. Like it was a lifeline she could flip over whenever silence got too loud. Her hair was glossy, her nails immaculate. She smiled a little too quickly after every sentence, like she was stamping pleasant onto the moment. The man across from her kept his hands on the table, palms down, relaxed but deliberate. He wore a jacket that looked clean but tired, the fabric slightly worn at the cuffs. His watch wasn't flashy. His phone stayed in his pocket. When he laughed, it was quiet, more breath than sound. I carried a tray past them and caught the opening lines. "So you're," she started, and then paused, like she'd forgotten how to say a simple thing without making it a test. "Yeah," he replied, gentle. "I'm Ethan. Claire," she said, bright. Too bright. Like she was saying her name the way you say your order. They shook hands. That was what did it, the handshake. People who want something real don't shake hands like they're closing a deal. They just meet. They look at each other like they're curious. This looked like strategy. I dropped water at table 12, then swung back to table 9 with my notepad. "Hi," I said, my voice easy. "I'm Maya. I'll be taking care of you tonight." The woman gave me a practiced smile. The man nodded like he was grateful I existed. I asked if they were ready to order. She didn't even glance at the menu before choosing something specific and expensive. The words rolling out like she'd rehearsed them. The salmon, and a glass of the Sancerre. He looked at the menu for an extra beat, not pretending to, actually reading. "I'll do the pasta," he said finally. "And just water is fine." It wasn't the choice itself that struck me. Plenty of people order pasta and water. It was the way he said it. Like he didn't want to create any pressure. Like he'd learned that too much too soon could make someone disappear. I wrote it down and walked away, but my attention stayed tethered to that table like a loose thread snagged on my sleeve. As the night moved, I caught pieces. She asked questions that sounded like traps. He answered like someone trying not to step on glass. "What do you do?" she asked. "Consulting," he said. "Mostly operations." "Operations," she repeated, tasting it. "So you travel?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I don't love being away." She tilted her head. "Why's that?" And the pause that followed felt heavier than it should have. He didn't flinch. He didn't perform. He just looked down at his water glass, fingertips resting against the condensation ring on the table, and said, "Because I have someone at home who notices when I'm gone." Something in my chest tightened, an involuntary, quiet reaction, like my body had recognized a truth before my mind caught up. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not cruel, just calculating. "Someone," she echoed. He nodded once. She leaned back in her chair and smiled again. Still polite, still glossy, only now it didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, drawing the word out as if she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. She glanced at his jacket, his water, his simple pasta, and then she asked the question that changed the temperature of the entire table. "Do you have kids?" For a split second, the whole room seemed to hold its breath with them. Claire's question, "Do you have kids?" wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed like a fork dropped on tile. Sharp, obvious, impossible to ignore. Ethan didn't look surprised, though. If anything, he looked prepared. He blinked once, slow. His hand stayed on the table. Fingers relaxed, like he'd trained himself not to grip when something hurt. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." Claire's eyes flicked over his face, then down, his jacket, his water. The pasta he'd ordered like it was an apology. "How old?" she asked. 8, he answered. "His name's—" He stopped himself, just for a moment, like he'd almost handed her something fragile by accident. Then he finished anyway. "His name's Liam." I felt a strange little jolt in my chest at the name. Not because it was rare, because it sounded like someone who still believed adults meant what they said. Claire's smile remained in place, but it shifted. It became thinner, more selective. A smile that didn't open doors, just closed them politely. "Oh," she said, as if Ethan had told her he collected spiders. "I'm a single dad," he added, not defensive. "Just honest. It's been me and him for a while." Claire tapped her nails lightly against the stem of her wine glass. Click, click, click. She leaned forward, like she was about to share a secret. "I'm just going to be direct," she said. "I don't date men with kids." Ethan's face stayed calm, but his throat moved, an involuntary swallow, the kind that happens when you're trying to keep something down. "You don't?" he asked softly. "It's not personal," she said immediately, which is what people say when it is. "I'm sure you're nice, but I'm not trying to be someone's second priority." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't say he wouldn't make her second. He didn't say my son isn't a burden. He didn't do any of the things that might have made her feel powerful. He just nodded once, as if he'd heard this exact sentence before and already knew the shape of it. "I understand," he said. Claire's shoulders loosened, like she'd been waiting for him to push back so she could win. When he didn't, she seemed almost disappointed. She picked up her purse. Ethan stayed seated. That, more than anything, made me look twice. Most men would scramble, would offer a joke, a promise, a bargain. Ethan didn't. He watched her with quiet eyes while she stood. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said. Claire gave a small laugh that didn't reach her chest. "Yeah, you too." Then she walked away. Just like that. No tears, no raised voices, no scene, because the cleanest rejection is the kind that makes you question whether you're allowed to feel anything about it. Ethan stared at the empty chair for a few seconds, as if his mind hadn't caught up with her body leaving. Then he looked down at his plate and exhaled slowly, the air leaving him like he'd been holding it since the moment she asked. I should have returned to my other tables. I had refills to do, checks to run, a birthday candle someone was waiting on, but my eyes stayed on table 9. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket, maybe for his phone, maybe for cash. And that's when it happened. A folded piece of paper slipped free and drifted down beside his shoe. Light, careless, almost graceful. Like it didn't know it mattered. Ethan froze. He didn't pick it up right away. He stared at it with a look that wasn't embarrassment. It was something else, something raw and private. Like the floor had swallowed a part of his life, and he wasn't sure he had the right to retrieve it in public. I took 3 steps towards his table before I even realized I was moving. The paper had unfolded slightly in its fall. Crayon, thick lines, a stick figure holding hands with a smaller one, a lopsided sun, a blocky house, and in shaky letters, pressed too hard into the page. Dad. My throat tightened in a way that annoyed me. I wasn't the kind of person who cried at children's drawings. I'd seen plenty, stuck on fridges, taped to windows, left behind in booths like little ghosts. But something about that word, Dad, sitting there on the floor beside a rejected man's shoe felt like a quiet kind of cruelty. Ethan finally leaned down, careful, and picked it up like it could tear. When he straightened, he tucked it against his palm for a moment before folding it back up. Then he looked at me, not flirtatious, not pleading, just steady. Sorry, he said, as if his life had inconvenienced the restaurant. Could I get a pen? A pen, I repeated, stupidly. He nodded once. His voice dropped lower. I just need to write something. I saw his plate barely touched. I saw the empty chair. I saw the folded drawing pressed against his thumb like an anchor. And I thought, without meaning to, about what it does to a kid when their parent comes home looking smaller than they left. I should have handed him a pen. That would have been the normal thing, the kind thing. Instead, my mouth moved faster than my heart. No, I said, and the moment the word left me, Ethan's eyes flickered, just once, like I'd rejected him too. The word no hung between us, like a dropped glass that hadn't hit the floor yet. Ethan didn't react the way most people do when they get rejected twice in one night. He didn't scoff, didn't roll his eyes, didn't ask to speak to a manager. He just stared at me for half a second longer than normal, like he was checking whether I meant it. Then his gaze lowered to the folded drawing in his hand. Okay, he said softly. 1 syllable, no edge to it. He began to slide the drawing back into his jacket pocket, careful, like he didn't want to crease the word Dad. I felt heat crawl up my neck, because I hadn't said no out of cruelty. I hadn't even said it because I was tired or annoyed, or because customers sometimes treat waitresses like furniture. I said it because something in me panicked, something old and irrational, like a reflex. And now I could see what my reflex had done. It had made him smaller. I forced my body to move, because standing there felt like hovering over a wound. I can check with the bar. I lied automatically, backing away with my notepad still in my hand. Ethan nodded again, polite, distant. Don't worry about it. I walked to the service station like my legs were on autopilot, but my mind stayed at table 9. Behind the counter, the espresso machine screamed. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly near the hostess stand. The restaurant was full of normal life, and yet my attention narrowed down to the quiet triangle of that blind date table. 2 empty chairs and 1 man holding a piece of paper like it mattered more than dignity. Tessa, one of the other servers, brushed past me with a tray of cocktails. You okay? She asked, barely looking. Fine, I said too quickly. I tried to shake it off. I tried to be normal. I poured water, ran food, smiled at strangers. But every time I passed table 9, I looked. Ethan didn't call anyone. He didn't immediately pay and leave. He just sat there with his shoulders slightly forward, staring at nothing, like he'd been turned down so cleanly that there wasn't even a mess to prove it happened. I saw him take out his phone once. Only once. He turned it face up on the table for a moment, his thumb hovering. A message preview flashed across the screen when it lit up. Too quick for me to read fully, but enough to catch a word that made my stomach tighten. Dad. He flipped the phone back over as if he'd shown too much. Something about that gesture, protective, private, hit me in the ribs. I'd seen men in this place perform heartbreak like it was a theater piece. Loud sighs, angry texts, dramatic exits. Ethan's silence was different. His silence felt like a habit, a survival skill. I busied myself wiping a table that was already clean, watching him through the mirror behind the bar. He finally reached for his water, took a sip, then set the glass down carefully in the exact spot it had been before. like routine was the only thing keeping him steady. I hated myself a little for saying no. And I hated myself more because I still wasn't sure what I should have done. The drawing had looked familiar. Not the stick figures. Every kid draws stick figures. It was the corner of the page. The faint stamp from a school printer. The little star sticker stuck, half peeling near the bottom. I'd seen that sticker before. I couldn't place it at first, but my body had reacted as if it could. Like memory lived in my hands, not my brain. 8 years old, he'd said. A single dad. A blind date gone cold. And that name, Liam, pressed into my thoughts like a thumbprint. My chest felt tight the way it does when you're about to recognize something you're not ready to recognize. I went to the drawer under the register and pulled out a pen. My fingers closed around it. Simple plastic, cheap, harmless. I turned and started toward table 9. Halfway there, I slowed, because I realized I wasn't bringing him a pen anymore. I was bringing him something else. A signal, a sign that someone had seen him get rejected and decided he wasn't invisible. And that was exactly what I was afraid of. I reached the table anyway. Ethan looked up as I approached, but his eyes didn't brighten. They didn't hope. They just waited, like he'd already accepted that the world was done being kind for the night. I held the pen out. His gaze dropped to it, then back to my face. You said no, he murmured, not accusing, just stating a fact. I changed my mind, I said, and my voice sounded too thin. He didn't take it right away. He stared at my hand, like he didn't trust gifts that came after rejection. Then he reached out slowly and took the pen, his fingers brushing mine by accident. His hand was warm, and his grip was gentle, which for some reason made my throat sting. Thanks, he said, barely audible. He clicked the pen once, then paused, staring at the tip like he wasn't sure what he was allowed to write. I watched him unfold the drawing. The paper trembled slightly, not from nerves, more like exhaustion. He turned it over and began to write on the back in careful, neat letters. I couldn't see the words from where I stood, but I could see the way his shoulders lowered while he wrote, like the act itself steadied him. When he finished, he capped the pen and looked up at me. There was something in his expression that wasn't romance. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was a kind of quiet honesty that made me feel exposed. I'm sorry, I blurted before I could stop myself. For earlier, Ethan blinked. His mouth pressed into a line, then loosened again. It's fine, he said. It wasn't fine. I insisted, softer now. You didn't do anything wrong. His eyes held mine for a second, and then, just as quietly as he'd accepted Claire's rejection, he said the thing that made my chest go cold. I know, he whispered. I just needed one kind person tonight. And in that moment, I realized I might have been too late, because the note he'd just written wasn't for me. It was for his son, and as he folded the drawing back up, I caught a glimpse of the last line, only 4 words, before he tucked it into his pocket. Don't worry, I tried. After I handed him the pen, I should have walked away and let the night swallow the moment like it does with everything else in a restaurant. But my eyes kept drifting back to table 9, like something there was unfinished. Ethan wrote on the back of that drawing with the kind of care people usually save for letters they never mail. He didn't scribble. He didn't rush. His shoulders eased as he formed each line, and that made my throat tighten in a way I didn't appreciate. When he folded the paper again and tucked it into his jacket pocket, he looked smaller, not pitiful, just contained. Like he'd learned how to make disappointment fit inside a body without spilling. I forced myself to move. Table 6 needed their check. Table 10 was asking for another basket of bread. Someone at the bar wanted to know if the mezcal was smoky or just lightly smoky. And I had to pretend that mattered. Maya. My manager's voice cut through the noise as I passed the service station. Jonas stood there with a tablet in his hand, eyebrows lifted. You're hovering. I'm not, I said automatically. Jonah didn't even argue. He just gave me that look that meant this is a business, not your personal movie. Table 9 is done, he said. Turnover matters. Don't get involved with people's dates. People's dates. Like a blind date wasn't already a tiny disaster waiting to happen. Like being rejected in public wasn't something you could feel in your skin. I'm working, I said, and it came out flatter than I meant. Good, Jonah replied. Then work. I walked away, cheeks warm, pretending my hands weren't shaking. But a few minutes later, I saw Ethan lift his eyes and scan the room, not searching for Claire, searching for me. He raised his hand just slightly, not demanding, not impatient. The universal sign for whenever you have a second. I went to him anyway. Yes, I asked, and my voice tried to sound normal. Could I get the check? He said. Of course. When I returned with it, he didn't open the folder right away. He just stared at it for a moment, like the word total might decide something about him. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket where the drawing had disappeared, and pulled out a simple wallet. He paid quietly. No theatrics. No tip that screamed, look how generous I am. Just enough to be respectful. And still, something about it felt deliberate. Not stingy. Not performative. Controlled. Like he was keeping the volume of himself low on purpose. I took the folder, thanked him, and stepped away. But my mind stayed stuck on that drawing, on the word Dad pressed into paper hard enough to leave an imprint. A few minutes later, Ethan stood. He didn't look around for approval. He didn't stare at couples holding hands. He simply put his chair back gently, as if he didn't want to disturb anyone else's happiness. Before he left, he paused and glanced at the table one last time. Not like a man thinking about the woman who rejected him, like a man thinking about the kid waiting at home. Then he walked out into the night. I told myself that was the end of it, but when I went to clear table 9, my stomach dropped. Under the table, half tucked near the leg, like it had been kicked there and forgotten, was a folded sheet of paper. At first, I thought it was trash. A receipt, a napkin, something left behind after a date goes wrong. Then I saw the little star sticker in the corner. A cheap, gold star sticker. The exact kind I kept in my volunteer bag. The kind I gave kids when they finished their reading logs, or when they sat through a whole hour without exploding, or when they needed proof that someone noticed they tried. My fingers went cold. I unfolded the paper slowly, like it might accuse me. It wasn't a love note. It wasn't even romantic. It was a list, written in neat, careful handwriting. Rules for the first 10 minutes. Mention Liam early. Watch her eyes when she hears his name. If she gets distant, don't argue. If she rejects you, thank her. She saved him from pretending. My breath caught. My thumb traced the last line without thinking. And at the bottom, underlined once like a promise. The right person won't tolerate him. She'll see him. I stood there with the paper in my hands, the restaurant noise rushing around me, and suddenly everything made sense. The cheap jacket, the water instead of wine, the way he didn't defend himself, the way he didn't chase Claire when she rejected him. It wasn't a test about money. It was a test about what people do when a child becomes inconvenient. I swallowed hard, stared at that star sticker, and felt a memory rise sharp and clear. Small hands at the community center table, crayons rolling, a boy concentrating so hard his tongue peeked out the corner of his mouth. Liam. I didn't even think. I just folded the paper and walked fast. Past Jonah, past the hostess stand, past the warm glass doors, out into the colder air. Ethan was near the curb, under the streetlight, keys in his hand. He looked up when he heard the door. For a second, his face tightened like he expected another rejection. I held the paper out. You dropped this. He froze. His eyes went straight to the star sticker, then back to me, and in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared, he asked, You know what that is? My heart thudded once, heavy. I think I do, I said, and I think I know who Liam is. Ethan's grip tightened around his keys, but he didn't step back. He just looked at me like he was standing on the edge of something. Then he asked the question that made the night feel suddenly much bigger than a blind date. Do you think, he said carefully, people can be good to a kid who isn't theirs? The air outside felt colder than it should have, like the restaurant had been holding the warmth hostage. Ethan stood under the streetlight with his keys in one hand and his shoulders slightly hunched, the way people do when they're trying to look fine while their insides aren't cooperating. Cars rolled by in soft whooshes. Somewhere nearby, a bus sighed at a stop. When I didn't answer right away, he repeated it. Still calm, still careful. Do you think people can be good to a kid who isn't theirs? My fingers tightened around the folded paper. I could feel the edge of the gold star sticker through it, like a tiny raised scar. I think they can, I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. But not everyone wants to. Ethan nodded once, like that was the answer he'd expected, like he'd built his whole system around it. He glanced toward the restaurant windows, where warm light blurred everything into soft shapes. Then he looked back at me. I'm not looking for someone to raise him, he said quietly. I'm not looking for a replacement. He stopped, as if the words were too exposed out here. I just can't bring him into another home where he's tolerated. The word tolerated hit me low in the chest. I swallowed. So you do this a lot. His jaw shifted. Not guilt, more like resignation. I've tried, he admitted. More than I want to. And you keep it low? I lifted my chin toward his jacket, the water he'd ordered, the way he'd stayed quiet. You make yourself look like you don't have much. Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile, except it didn't have joy in it. I make myself look like me, he said, without the parts people chase. That was the first time something sharp flashed in his eyes. Not anger at Claire, not bitterness at me, something protective, something tired. I unfolded the paper and held it up between us. I found this, I said, under your table. His gaze dropped instantly. The list, the rules, the underlined line at the bottom. He didn't reach for it. He just breathed out through his nose, slow and quiet, like he'd been caught with something he didn't want anyone to see. I didn't mean to leave it, he said. I know, I replied. But, Ethan, you wrote it like you were coaching yourself through a minefield. He stared at the paper, then at the dark street beyond me. It is a minefield, he said, except the thing that explodes isn't me. My throat tightened. I hated how much I understood that. Still, something in me resisted. That's not fair to people, I said, testing them. Ethan finally looked at me fully. I'm not testing if they deserve me, he said. I'm testing if they're safe for him. He said him like it was a vow. The space between us went quiet. I tried to imagine being 8 years old and watching your dad come home after another blind date. His voice too controlled. His smile too practiced. A kid doesn't need details. They feel the weight anyway. I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the paper without thinking. You think you're protecting him? I murmured. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. I am. And what happens when he realizes he's the reason you're doing this? The words came out softer than I intended. More like worry than accusation. Ethan's expression shifted just a hair, like the question landed in a place he hadn't put armor on. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time all night, he looked unsure. I don't tell him, he said finally. I don't bring him into it. I bring him up early. I watch. That's it. I shook my head slightly. Kids notice anyway. Ethan's fingers tightened around his keys. The metal clicked faintly. I know, he whispered. We stood there under the streetlight, and suddenly the blind date didn't feel like the main story anymore. It felt like the cover page to something much bigger and quieter. I exhaled and forced myself to say what I'd been circling since I picked up that paper. That gold star, I said, pointing to the corner. The sticker. His eyes flicked to it again. I've seen it, I continued. Not here. Ethan didn't move, but I felt the air change around him, like his body went still on purpose. Where? He asked, voice barely above the street noise. I hesitated, because the moment I said it, I couldn't take it back. At the community center, I said. Harbor House. The kids' program. Ethan's face tightened, and for a second I thought he was about to deny it, like the name might be too private to share with a stranger. Then he exhaled slow. Liam goes there after school, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. Ethan's eyes searched my face, like he was trying to decide if I was safe too. That's why you said no, he said quietly. The pen. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple, but I nodded again. I recognized the sticker, I admitted, and I recognized the paper. The printer stamp, the kind they used for the kids' worksheets. Ethan's throat moved. You've met him, he said. The word met made it sound light, harmless, ordinary. I felt my stomach twist. Yes, I said. I've met Liam. Ethan's voice dropped even lower, like he didn't want the night to overhear. How? He asked. I looked back at the warm restaurant doors, the glow, the normal people inside laughing like nothing sharp ever happened. Then I looked at Ethan, and I told him the part that made my pulse jump because it meant this wasn't just a random overlap. It was last week, I said. He was at the table with the crayons. Ethan's brow furrowed, confusion cracking through his control. He doesn't usually draw there, he said. He did, I replied. My fingers tightened around the paper, and when I asked him what he was making, he said something I haven't been able to forget. Ethan's eyes locked onto mine. What did he say? He whispered. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. He said, I began and my voice came out thin. I make these for when Dad comes home quiet. Ethan went completely still, and in the silence that followed, I realized I wasn't just holding a lost piece of paper anymore. I was holding the first crack in the story he'd been trying to keep unbreakable. Ethan didn't move after I repeated Liam's words. For a moment, he looked like someone had turned the volume down on the world and left him alone with one sentence. I make these for when Dad comes home quiet. His keys hung from his fingers, motionless. The streetlight above us buzzed faintly. A car passed and threw a quick wash of headlights across his face, and in that flash I saw it. How hard he was holding himself together. He swallowed once. Then again. His voice caught barely. He cleared his throat like he hated that it happened. He said that. I nodded, and the motion felt too heavy. He didn't sound sad. I added quickly, as if that would help. More matter of fact. Like it was normal. Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. The kind of breath you take when you're trying not to show your insides in public. That's worse, he whispered. I didn't know what to say to that. So I stared at the folded paper in my hands instead. The star sticker glinted faintly as I shifted it. My fingers were cold. My stomach was tight. I realized I'd been standing here with my shoulders raised like I was bracing for a hit. Ethan finally looked at me again. Not like a man on a blind date. Like a single dad looking at someone who'd accidentally found the one soft spot he never wanted exposed. That's why you rejected me, he said. The pen. His tone wasn't accusing. It was almost relieved, like the pieces had clicked. I swallowed. Yes. He waited, patient, giving me room. And that kindness made me feel more guilty than anger ever could. I thought. I started then stopped. The truth sounded ugly out loud. I thought you were doing something that kids don't deserve, I said finally. I thought you were using him as. I winced at the word before it fully landed. As a prop. Ethan's jaw flexed, but he didn't interrupt. I forced myself to keep going. I've seen it, I said. Not exactly like this, but people who bring their kids into adult messes. People who make their kid part of a story they're trying to sell. I didn't mean to say people. I meant to say my mom. The memory rose anyway. The way grown men smiled at her and pretended I didn't exist, until they needed to look generous. The way I learned to become small in doorways, to be quiet so I wouldn't be the reason someone left. I wrapped my arms around myself without realizing it. I grew up feeling like baggage, I admitted. Like love was something you earned by being convenient. Ethan's eyes softened. He looked down for a second, like he respected the confession too much to stare at it. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I shook my head. Don't. It's not. My voice went thin. It's why I panicked. When she rejected you and then that drawing fell out, it felt like I was watching a kid get rejected too, even if he wasn't there. Ethan's mouth tightened at that, and for the first time I saw anger in him, not pointed at Claire, not even at the situation, at the idea. He didn't speak right away. He just opened his jacket pocket and pulled the folded drawing out again. He held it carefully, like it had weight. I don't bring him into it, he said. I don't tell him where I'm going. I don't let him meet anyone. I don't even say the word date around him. His voice dropped lower. I only mention him early. That's it. Because the truth is, people are very good at pretending until a child is real. He looked up, and there was something brutally tired in his eyes. Claire wasn't cruel, he added. Not really. She was honest. And that's better than someone who says yes, then makes him feel like a burden slowly. My throat tightened again. I looked at the paper in my hands, the list of rules, and hated how much sense it made. So this isn't about money, I murmured. Ethan let out a short, humorless breath. I don't care about money in this context. I care about patterns. He tapped the edge of the drawing with his thumb, a tiny gesture, tender. I've dated someone who smiled at him, he said, almost like he didn't want to say it. Bought him gifts, told me she loved kids. My stomach dropped. The way he said it, past tense, already told me how it ended. And then, I asked softly. Ethan's eyes went distant. His shoulders pulled in just slightly, like he was remembering something he didn't want to relive. And then one night, he said, he spilled juice on her shoes. I waited, holding my breath without meaning to. She didn't scream. Ethan continued. She didn't hit him. She didn't do anything that would leave marks. His voice turned sharper, controlled. She looked at him and said, God, you're messy. No wonder your mom left. My stomach lurched like I'd missed a step on stairs. Ethan blinked once, hard. He was 7, he said. He didn't cry in front of her. He just went to the bathroom and locked the door. Ethan's hand tightened around the drawing until the paper bent slightly. Then he loosened, as if he caught himself. I ended it that night, he said. But the damage didn't end, because kids don't forget sentences like that. I stared at him, chest tight, and suddenly my no made more sense. My body had recognized the danger before my mind did. I'm sorry, I whispered. Ethan shook his head once. Don't be. You rejected me. He met my eyes. But you didn't reject him. The words landed heavy. I looked down at the list again. The underlined line at the bottom. The right person won't tolerate him. She'll see him. My voice came out small. And what if the right person never shows up? Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared at the pavement like he was choosing a truth carefully. Then it's just me, he said. And that's still okay. I can do okay. But his eyes said something else. Lonely, but refusing to gamble with a child's heart. A notification sound cut through the air. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He froze for half a second, different from before. This wasn't awkward date tension. This was instinct. He pulled the phone out fast and glanced at the screen. His whole face changed. Not fear, focus. Sorry, he said immediately, already tapping. This is my check-in. He lifted it to his ear and turned slightly away. But I still heard the voice on the other end. Small, sleepy, trying to sound brave. Dad, Liam said, Are you quiet tonight? Ethan shut his eyes for a brief moment, like the question physically hurt. Then he opened them and answered in the gentlest voice I'd heard all night. No, buddy, he said. Not quiet. I'm okay. And as I stood there under the streetlight listening to an 8-year-old monitor his father's silence like a weather report, I realized something that made my hands go numb. Liam wasn't waiting at home for Ethan to find love. He was waiting to find out if his dad came back broken again. Ethan listened, murmured something soothing, and then his gaze flicked to me. Quick, apologetic, almost embarrassed. But I wasn't judging. I was terrified, because if a child was already asking that question, what was he seeing that none of us could? Ethan kept the phone to his ear like it was the one thing holding him upright. Liam's voice was small and careful, like he was trying to sound older than 8. Are you sure? He asked. You're not quiet. Ethan's eyes flicked to me for half a second, apologetic, exposed. Then he softened his voice even more. I'm sure, he said. I'm okay. I'm just outside for a minute. There was a pause. I could almost hear Liam thinking. Did someone reject you? He asked, and my stomach dropped. Ethan didn't hesitate. That scared me more than any lie. Someone left, he said gently. But that's not the same as you being unlovable. Okay. Liam breathed out on the line, like he'd been holding his own breath too. Okay, he whispered. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. He turned slightly away from me, like he wanted to keep the rest private. But I still caught pieces. Promises that sounded routine because they had to. I'll be home soon, Ethan said. I'll put the drawing on the fridge. And tomorrow, pancakes. Blueberry like you like. A small sound came from the speaker. Half laugh, half relief. Okay, Liam said again. And this time it sounded like a kid. Ethan ended the call and stood still for a moment, staring at the dark street like he was waiting for the emotion to pass through him without leaving a mark. When he finally looked at me, his expression was calm again. Too calm. Sorry, he said, like he'd just taken a business call. He checks in sometimes. Checks in? I repeated quietly. Ethan's mouth twitched. Yeah, he listens for changes. My throat tightened. I understood what he meant without needing more detail. A child who monitors silence learns it somewhere. I held the folded paper, the list, the rules between my fingers. He asked if you were quiet, I said, like it's a normal question. Ethan's eyes dropped, then lifted again. It became normal. I didn't know whether to step closer or give him space. So I did neither. I stayed exactly where I was, arms folded, trying to keep my voice steady. That's why you do the test, I said. Ethan didn't correct me this time. That's why I do the filter, he replied. I don't call it a test. What's the difference? I asked. He exhaled slowly. A test is when you're hoping someone fails so you can feel right. A filter is when you're trying to keep something precious from getting hurt. He looked down at his keys, then back up. I can handle being rejected, he said. I've been rejected. By clients. By friends. By a life. His voice tightened on the last word. But Liam can't carry that. Not again. I stared at him. Again. Ethan's jaw flexed. For a second, I thought he might shut down and end the conversation. He didn't. When his mom left, he said quietly, he stopped asking why after a while. He started asking what he did wrong. My chest went hot and cold at the same time. I tell him the truth, Ethan continued, that adults make choices for reasons that don't belong to children, that he didn't cause it. His eyes darkened, but he still watches me. I glanced down at the star sticker, at the underlined line on the paper. The right person won't tolerate him. She'll see him. So you go on blind dates, I said, and you mention him early. Ethan nodded. And then you watch, I said. His voice was flat, like he was reciting a process he hated needing. I watch their eyes. The microsecond after they hear his name, I watch if they ask about him like he's a person or like he's a complication. I swallowed. And if they get distant, I don't chase, he said. I thought of Claire standing up, leaving with a clean smile like she was returning a product. Ethan's gaze drifted to the restaurant door. If they reject me because I'm a single dad, that's information. It's not evil. It's just not safe for him. The word safe echoed in me. I'd said something similar to myself as a kid, only I didn't have the language for it. I just had instincts. I'd learned to read eyes, too. Learned who wanted my mom and who wanted the version of her that didn't come with me. I hate that I understand you, I admitted, and my voice cracked a little. Ethan's eyes softened. That's why you said no. Yes, I said, then shook my head. But I did it wrong. He didn't argue. He just waited. I stared at the pavement. When I recognized the sticker, I thought you were dragging him into it. I thought you were using him as a shield. Ethan's expression tightened. I know, I cut in quickly. I know that now. But in that moment, my brain didn't think. It reacted. I looked up at him, forcing myself to be honest. I grew up being tolerated, I said. People smiled at my mom, then looked through me like I was furniture. And the ones who did notice me, it wasn't always kindness. Sometimes it was control. Sometimes it was the kind of nice that makes your skin crawl. Ethan's face went still. He didn't flinch from it. He just listened like it mattered. So when I saw Dad fall out of your pocket, I whispered. It felt like I was watching a kid wait for the fallout. Ethan's throat moved. There is fallout, he said barely. I didn't know what to do with that. So I asked the question that had been burning since I read his rules. Does Liam know you do this? I asked. Ethan shook his head immediately. No. He knows I meet people sometimes. He knows. I'm trying. He paused, voice tightening. But he doesn't know why. I thought of Liam's voice on the phone. Did someone reject you? He knew more than Ethan wanted to admit. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the drawing again. He unfolded it carefully, and this time he didn't hide the back. The message he'd written earlier was neat, controlled, like he'd forced his hand to stay steady. If I come home quiet, it's not because of you. It's because adults sometimes don't know what they're missing. I'm proud of you. I'm always coming back. My vision blurred for a second. I blinked hard and hated myself for it. Ethan refolded the drawing and tucked it away like it was a vow. That's my pattern, he said quietly. I don't let my silence become his problem. I swallowed. And tonight, Ethan's mouth pressed into a line. Tonight, he heard it anyway. We stood there with the street noise around us, and for a moment I almost forgot the restaurant behind me. Almost forgot I was still wearing an apron, still on shift, still supposed to be invisible. Then Ethan's phone buzzed again. He looked down. His expression changed in a way that made my stomach tighten, like annoyance mixed with something wary. A text message lit up the screen. Claire, I didn't know. I'm still here. Can we talk? Ethan didn't reply. He just stared at it for a second too long. Then he lifted his eyes to the restaurant entrance, and I followed his gaze, just in time to see Claire step out into the streetlight, her heels clicking, her smile already back in place. Only this time, she wasn't looking at Ethan. She was looking at me, and the look on her face said she decided exactly what kind of story this was going to be. Claire's heels hit the sidewalk like punctuation. Click, click, click. She walked out of the restaurant with the same posture she had at the table. Perfect spine, chin slightly lifted, smile ready like a tool. But now she wasn't performing for Ethan. She was performing for me. I felt my body go alert in that instant. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling you get when you realize someone has decided you're part of their story and you didn't consent. Ethan looked down at his phone, then back up at her. He didn't move toward her. He didn't soften. He just stood there under the streetlight, keys in hand, calm like a locked door. Claire stopped a few feet away and let her eyes flick between us, like she was mapping a triangle. Wow, she said lightly. So that's what this is. Ethan's expression didn't change. Claire. She smiled wider, as if his tone amused her. Ethan. Then she looked at me again. Is she with you? The question wasn't really a question. It was a claim, wrapped in sweetness. I opened my mouth, but Ethan spoke first, quiet, firm. She's the waitress, he said. She brought me a pen. Claire's brows lifted. A pen? She repeated it like it was code for something else. My face warmed. I hated how easily she could make a simple object sound suspicious. Claire folded her arms. So you get rejected on a blind date, and then you're outside having a little moment with the waitress. Ethan didn't flinch. You left. And you weren't honest, she snapped, the sweetness cracking for the first time. You let me sit there thinking you were, struggling? Just water is fine. Ethan's eyes stayed steady. I ordered what I wanted. Claire made a short laugh. Right, because that's normal. Because men who are fine don't do these little tests. My stomach tightened. The word landed sharp. You don't know what you're talking about, I said before I could stop myself. Claire's head turned slowly toward me, like she couldn't believe I'd spoken. Oh, she said, voice silky. You do. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, barely visible, like he wanted to end this, but he didn't want to make it worse. Claire stepped 1 inch closer, not into Ethan's space, into mine. This is between me and him, she said, still smiling. Adults, dating, boundaries. Then why are you looking at me? I asked. The smile froze. Claire's eyes flicked to Ethan. Because suddenly you have an audience. She tilted her head. And I'm just trying to understand what kind of man I just met. Ethan's voice stayed low. You understood enough to leave. Claire's lips pressed together. Then she took a breath like she was switching strategies. I didn't leave because you have a kid, she said quickly, too quickly. I left because you didn't mention it up front. Ethan didn't move. I did. Claire blinked. Not immediately. It was within 10 minutes, Ethan replied. Calm. Precise. Claire's eyes narrowed. So you admit it. You time it. You drop it like a bomb and watch what happens. My throat tightened. She was so close to the truth and still missing it. Ethan's voice didn't rise. Yes. Claire's face brightened for half a second, like she'd caught him. There. So you are testing women. Ethan held her gaze. I'm filtering. Claire scoffed. Filtering. That's a cute word. Ethan's expression was almost tired now. It's an honest word. Claire's eyes flicked down to his jacket, to his keys, to his phone, searching for clues. Then she said, casually, like she was tossing a pebble, I Googled you. The sentence cut through the air. Ethan's posture didn't change, but I saw something in his eyes. An instant of cold control, like he'd expected this outcome at some point and hated that he was right. Claire shrugged, proud of herself. I got curious. You don't have social media, which is already weird, but your name popped up in a few places. Her smile sharpened. So, operations consulting. Huh? Ethan didn't answer. Claire's gaze slid to me again. You know what's funny? She said. Men always say they want someone real, but they still want to be wanted. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. You rejected him, I said, voice steady. That should have been the end. Claire's smile twitched. I rejected the situation. Ethan finally spoke again, quiet but dangerous in its calm. You rejected my son, he said. The streetlight buzzed faintly overhead. Claire's face flickered, just for a second. Not guilt, annoyance, like she hated being called out so cleanly. I rejected being someone's second choice, she snapped. I rejected being pulled into whatever baggage comes with that. Ethan's eyes hardened. He's not baggage. Claire lifted her chin. He's responsibility. Yes, Ethan said simply. And I won't bring him near someone who says that like it's a burden. Claire's eyes flashed. And then she did something that made my stomach drop. She softened her voice into something sweet again. Okay, she said. Fine. Maybe I said it wrong. I was surprised. She spread her hands. An actress offering vulnerability. But I'm not heartless. Ethan didn't respond. Claire looked between us, then smiled at me as if we were allies. I mean, I like kids. The lie was so smooth it almost sounded believable. I volunteer sometimes, she added, throwing it out like bait. I could meet him. Sometime. Ethan's grip tightened around his keys. I felt a cold wave run through me. Not jealousy, not romance. Something protective and furious. Because I suddenly understood what his filter was really guarding against. Not open cruelty. Performative kindness. The kind that smiles at a child and still makes them feel unwanted. Ethan stared at Claire for a long moment. Then, in the calmest voice I'd heard all night, he asked her one question. What's his name? Claire blinked. And in that tiny pause, just one beat too long, I saw it. She hadn't even tried to remember. Ethan waited, eyes steady, giving her space to either prove she was safe or prove she wasn't. And Claire's smile started to slip. Claire's smile stayed on her face, but it stiffened at the edges, like it had hit a wall. Ethan didn't blink. He just held the silence steady. What's his name? He repeated, calm as glass. For a heartbeat, Claire looked past him, like the street might feed her the right answer. Then she let out a small laugh, the kind people use when they're caught. Come on, she said lightly. You said it earlier. Ethan's expression didn't soften. I did. Claire's eyes flicked toward me again, fast, sharp, then back to him. Liam, she said, like she was reading it off a receipt. The name landed wrong. Not mispronounced, just empty, like a password. Ethan nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Okay, he said. Claire's brows pulled together. Okay. Ethan's voice stayed quiet. Now tell me one thing about him. Anything. Claire blinked. He's 8, she said quick. You told me that too. Ethan didn't move. That's not about him. That's a number. Claire's smile twitched, and for the first time, annoyance pushed through the polish. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're acting like I failed some interview. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Not cruel, just final. You did, he said, but not for me. Claire scoffed. Oh my God, are you serious? Yes, Ethan answered. Because when you heard I'm a single dad on a blind date, you didn't ask what kind of kid he is. You asked what kind of inconvenience he'd be. Claire's cheeks flushed. That is not what I said. It's what you meant, he replied, steady. And you were honest enough to leave. That part won respect. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. She switched tactics again, softer voice, wide eyes, like she was offering grace. I was surprised, she said. I panicked. But I came back, didn't I? I'm here. I'm trying. Ethan didn't give her an inch. Trying would have been staying kind when it got uncomfortable. Claire's gaze cut to me. So what is this? She asked, voice turning sharp again. You get rejected, and suddenly the waitress is your moral judge? I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level. I'm not judging you, I said. I'm just listening. Claire laughed, bitter. Right, listening, like you weren't out here hovering the second I stood up. Ethan took one slow step toward her. Not aggressive, just enough to reclaim the space. Don't, he said quietly. Claire froze. Ethan's tone didn't change. Don't make her the villain because you don't like what you revealed. Claire's eyes narrowed. And what exactly did I reveal? Ethan looked at her like the answer was obvious. That you'd rather reject a child before you even meet him, he said. That you'd rather win than understand. Claire's mouth tightened. I rejected a situation. I rejected being trapped. No one was trapping you, Ethan replied. I wasn't asking you to be a stepmother. I wasn't asking you to fix my life. I was asking a simple question. He paused just a beat. Can you see a child as a person even if he complicates your plans? Claire stared at him, and I watched something crack. Her certainty. Not remorse. More like frustration that she couldn't control the narrative anymore. Then she did the thing I'd been waiting for. She went for money. I Googled you, she said again, sharper this time. So don't pretend this is all noble. You're not broke. You're not struggling. You just like watching women react. You like being rejected so you can feel superior. Ethan's eyes didn't flinch. He exhaled once, slow. Claire, he said, if I had shown you what I have, you would have stayed longer. That's the point. Claire's face flushed. That's insulting. It's accurate, Ethan replied. And I'm not interested in being wanted for what I can provide while my son is tolerated like cost. He turned slightly toward me then, and his voice softened by half a degree. Thank you, he said. I blinked. For what? For saying no, he replied. You rejected me for the right reason. My throat tightened. Claire made a disgusted sound. Unbelievable. Ethan didn't look at her again. He pocketed his phone, tightened his grip on his keys, and started toward his car like the decision was already made. And then my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I wasn't supposed to have it on me during shift. I almost ignored it until I saw the caller ID. Harbor House, after-school program. My stomach dropped. I answered before I could think. Hello? A staff member's voice came through, tight with urgency. Maya? It's Jenna. Liam's asking for his dad. He's really upset. He keeps saying his dad is quiet tonight and he can't sleep. My eyes snapped to Ethan. He'd gone still mid-step, like he'd heard his son's name through the air. I didn't know what my face did, but Ethan read it instantly. That's him, he said quietly. Not a question. I swallowed hard, my voice turning small into the phone. Okay, I'm here. Ethan was already moving, keys lifting. Tell them I'm coming, he said, voice tight but controlled. And behind us, Claire stood under the streetlight watching it all. Watching the real reason the test existed. Like she finally realized the story wasn't about a blind date at all. It was about whether a child would fall asleep tonight feeling safe. And Ethan didn't even glance back as he got into his car. Harbor House at night didn't look like the warm place it pretended to be during the day. The windows were dark except for one hallway light, and the building sat quiet on the block like it was holding its breath with the kids inside. Ethan pulled into the small lot too fast, then parked too carefully, like his hands were shaking and he was forcing them to behave. I shouldn't have been there. I was still in my apron. I still smelled like lemon and coffee. My manager was going to lose his mind when he realized I'd stepped out. But I couldn't erase the sound of Liam's voice from Ethan's phone. I couldn't unhear an 8-year-old asking whether his dad was quiet, like it was a storm warning. Ethan got out of the car and didn't wait for me to decide. He walked straight to the door, jaw set, eyes focused, the kind of calm that isn't peace, its urgency contained. Inside, the air smelled like markers and disinfectant. The front desk volunteer looked up and softened instantly when she saw Ethan. "He's in the reading room," she whispered, like loud voices might break something. Ethan nodded and moved down the hallway with quiet steps. I followed a few feet behind, my heart beating too hard for the situation. At the end of the hall, a small room glowed with warm lamplight, a kid-sized table, a rug with faded colors, a stack of picture books slightly crooked, like someone had tried to straighten them with shaky hands. Liam sat on the rug with his knees pulled to his chest. He was smaller than I remembered from the day's shift, when kids are loud and messy and bold. Tonight, he looked like a question mark, curled in on himself, hoodie sleeves covering part of his hands. When Ethan appeared in the doorway, Liam's whole body reacted before his face did, like his muscles recognized safety first. "Dad," he whispered. Ethan crouched instantly, lowering himself to Liam's level like it was instinct. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I'm here." Liam didn't run into his arms the way kids do in movies. He hesitated, eyes scanning Ethan's face like he was reading weather. "Are you quiet?" Liam asked again. The question hit the room like a small stone tossed into still water. Ethan didn't answer with words first. He opened his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded drawing. "I brought it," he said, "and I wrote on it." Liam's eyes widened just a little. He unfolded the paper carefully, like it might tear if he breathed too hard, and then he flipped it over to the back. I couldn't see all the lines from where I stood, but I saw Liam's eyes move left to right, slow and serious. I saw his mouth press into a tight line, trying not to feel too much. Ethan stayed still, letting the words do their work. When Liam finished reading, he looked up at Ethan, and his voice came out small. "You always come back," he said, like he was testing the sentence. Ethan nodded once. "Always." Liam stared for a beat longer, then lowered his eyes and said the thing that broke my chest open. "I make drawings so you won't be lonely," he whispered, "because when you're lonely, you get quiet." Ethan's face tightened, not with anger, pain, love, guilt, all wrapped into one expression he was trying to keep safe for his son. He reached out slowly and pulled Liam into a hug. This time, Liam didn't hesitate. He melted into it like a kid who'd been holding himself together too long. Ethan pressed his cheek to Liam's hair and whispered something I couldn't fully hear, just enough to catch a few words. "It's not your job," he murmured. "It's not your job to fix me." Liam's fingers clutched the back of Ethan's jacket like it was an anchor. I stood in the doorway, frozen, because I realized what Ethan's filter really was. It wasn't a game. It was a single dad trying to make sure his kid never felt responsible for an adult's emotional weather again. After a minute, Liam pulled back slightly and looked at Ethan's face. Still checking, still reading. Ethan forced a small smile. "Do you want pancakes tomorrow?" he asked, gentle, normal, like he was rebuilding the world one simple promise at a time. Liam blinked, then nodded. "Blueberry, blueberry," Ethan confirmed. Only then did Liam glance past Ethan and notice me. His eyes narrowed slightly, curious, cautious. "Who's she?" he asked. Ethan turned his head toward me, and for the first time that night his control faltered just a bit, like the question mattered in a different way. "That's Maya," he said carefully. "She works at the restaurant." Liam stared at me. I crouched down a little, not stepping closer, not forcing anything. "Hi, Liam," I said softly. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just studied me the way kids do when they're deciding whether someone is real. Then he held up the drawing. "She gave you the pen?" he asked, voice quiet. Ethan nodded. "She did." Liam looked down at the back of the paper again. Then he looked up at me and asked, blunt and honest in the way only kids can be, "Did you reject him too?" My throat tightened so hard I almost couldn't speak. Ethan's eyes flicked to mine, warning not to lie, but to be careful. I breathed in slowly. "Yes," I admitted. "I did." Liam's face didn't change. He just nodded once, like he was adding it to a list. "Why?" he asked. Because it wasn't a sweet question. It was an important one. I thought of my own childhood, of being tolerated, of learning to read adults too early, of the kind of nice that wasn't safe. And I told him the truth in the simplest way I could. "Because I didn't want you to get hurt," I said softly. "And I didn't understand at first." Liam stared at me for a long second. Then he looked at Ethan. Ethan's hand rested gently on Liam's shoulder, steady. And Liam did something that made my eyes burn. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small, folded paper of his own. Another drawing. Another crayon sun. He held it out toward Ethan. "For tomorrow," he said. Ethan took it carefully. "Thank you," he whispered. Then Liam looked at me again and said, very quietly, "You can't be mean to him." It wasn't a request. It was a boundary. My chest tightened with something like respect. "I won't," I promised. Liam nodded once, satisfied, like he'd placed the rule where it belonged. A staff member appeared in the doorway, behind me, with a gentle expression. "He can sleep on the couch here tonight," she whispered to Ethan. "We'll keep the light low." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." He looked down at Liam. "Want to stay here tonight or come home?" Liam yawned, eyes heavy now that the danger had passed. "Here," he mumbled, "but you stay until I sleep." Ethan's voice softened. "Of course." He tucked the drawings carefully into his jacket pocket, like they were the most valuable things he owned. Then he glanced at me just once. Not romantic, not inviting, just acknowledging. A silent thank you for seeing what the night was really about. I backed up toward the hallway, giving them space. The room felt sacred in a way restaurants never did. Quiet, honest, small. As I reached the door, I heard Ethan whisper to Liam, so low it was almost a breath, "I'm not quiet, buddy. I'm here." And in that moment, I understood the ending wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a reveal of wealth. It wasn't a dramatic reversal. The ending was simple. A child falling asleep feeling safe. A single dad learning that not every adult walks away. And me just a waitress. Realizing I wasn't the prize at the end of his test. I was only the first person who finally understood what he was really asking.
If this story stayed with you, the next one is already on your screen. Click to keep watching and subscribe for more real stories like this.